This is the Movie Theater Butter Podcast, where we talk about stories made into movies and what was modified for the big screen. As a warning, this episode will discuss the plot of both the movie and its original source material, so be ready for spoilers. I'm your host, Kim Labick, and I hope you enjoy the show. Who can take the sunshine, sprinkle it with dew, cover it with chocolate, and a miracle or two? That's right, the Candyman can. This week, the Movie Theater Butter Podcast is more like the Caramel Corn Podcast, as we discuss the candy-coated musical prequel film, Wonka. Here to sing along with me today is my friend and fellow AMC A-lister, Aaron. How's your day going, Aaron?
The day is good. I am very, very excited to be here today.
Love that. And we're excited to have you. This is, I feel like this is fate, because when the second that we both found out we were AMC A-listers specifically, I was like, okay, great. We're going to watch a ton of movies.
Right.
And we're going to do an episode of the podcast. And here we are.
It's fate. I feel like it is such a magical moment when you find another AMC A-lister, because it's like the Spider-Man thing. It's like the meme of all this. You kind of it's like, oh, it's like you have it too. You have it. Oh, great, wonderful. It's like we are family at this point. We will be seeing many films, and that's just how it's gonna be.
All right, so the 2023 movie musical Wonka, starring Timothée Chalamet. It's like a loose adaptation. It's a very loose prequel to the story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's not an official book of Wonka. It's based on the character. So yes, it's a prequel, so it's an adaptation of the character we know and love from the screen. But it's also, there's a lot of freedom with this adaptation because we don't know the full backstory of Willy Wonka. I mean, kind of the most that we got was in the Johnny Depp, Tim Burton version in the early 2000s. But he doesn't have his own story. So this is a very free adaptation. And just as a little fun fact, because I've got a lot of not creepy, but I've got a lot of dark fun facts for this episode. We'll get into it. This is not dark at all, but a fun fact is...
Yeah, I'm very curious of what these fun facts are.
It gets worse and worse throughout the episode. This one's pretty chill, so we'll start with this. Okay. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the original book, was written by Roald Dahl in 1964. And that was the same year as, a lot of stuff. I mean, the 60s were Vietnam War, Cold War, all that. But one interesting little fact is that was the same year that Bob Dylan introduced the Beatles to marijuana.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know.
And that correlates with the film and... Because
experiences and
friends. And there's music in the movie and everything is...
Yeah.
Yes.
And everything is kind of like a high trip.
Right? I mean, that whole boat ride, I know that there's no trippy acid trip boat ride in this film, but by memory of the first two, there is quite a lot of that.
Oh God, that was such a memorable moment. And it was funny because I never thought of it as creepy or weird as a kid, but the more that I watched it as I grew up, I was like, oh, this is kind of fucked. Yeah. This is messy.
Exactly. And I feel like as I'm entering this kind of mid-late 20s era of my life, I've been revisiting a lot of old movies, one of them being the original Willy Wonka, and it's just a lot darker than you think. And I recently rewatched The Wizard of Oz, and of course everyone kind of rewatched the old Hunger Games movies as the new one was coming out in November, and just there's a lot of dark stuff that you don't notice as a kid that's kind of glossed over, but then as an adult you're like, Willy Wonka's a little bit strange, and
he drugs and murders children.
Yes, and that is not good. I don't know whatever fantastical land that is in this Willy Wonka universe where that might be legal, but
not this one.
Not this one, no.
All right, so as always, we start off with our favorite quote from the source. Or not from the source, usually from the film, but, it's pretty loose interpretation. Yeah. Would you like to start? Would you like me to start?
I'll start. So
go for it.
This quote was in the trailer, and it remains my favorite because I don't know if it is just the way my brain thinks, but it took me a while to really understand what he was trying to say in this quote. It's when Willy Wonka himself, played by the wonderful Timothée Chalamet, says, So quiet up and listen down. Nope, scratch that, reverse it. And
I knew you were going to say that.
Right? So when I heard this wonderful quote, I was like, what? I was very confused. I was like, quiet up, listen down. And then, of course, I jumbled it back up, and I was like, okay, I understand what he's saying. I get it. Because I feel like that quote was our first kind of introduction to Timothée Chalamet as Willy Wonka. It kind of welcomed the whole Timothée Chalamet, Willy Wonka phenomenon, and I don't know. I think the quote is cute. I think it's fun. And we'll go into later how I thought Timothée Chalamet did in the film, but that is my favorite quote. I think it's very sweet. You can tell that he cares a lot. There's a lot of ambition, and it makes you think. It made me think when I first heard it. I was like, wait a damn minute, what are we going on here? But that is the quote that stuck out to me most throughout the film and from the trailer.
Yeah, it definitely really encapsulates his whole character, which is what the prequel should be about.
Right.
Very nice.
Yeah.
My personal favorite quote was when he said, "It's Wonkin time," and he smashed everyone with his fists of chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was great. No, sorry. My real favorite quote is, weirdly enough, I wanted to quote like the entire song that he sings, that first song, when he like rolls up into town. It's basically a kid's version of Another Day of Sun from La La Land.
Oh, okay. I like that comparison. I like that.
Yeah, because it's kind of, and I could quote the entire song right now, and I won't do that. It's probably easier if somebody wants to just look it up. I have one of the lines here, so I will read that. And one of the lines goes, "In this city, anyone can be successful if they have talent and work hard, or so they say. But they didn't mention it would be so stressful, just to make a dozen silver sovereigns last more than a day." And again, I think that really encapsulates like capitalism and, the day-to-day of trying to survive in a world, trying to make it in a world that is not made for you kind of thing, which is a lot of what this movie is about.
Yes, I agree. And I thought the songs were wonderful in this film.
Yeah.
I was very pleasantly surprised. And as someone who grew up doing musical theater, like I love movie musicals. I was a little bit skeptical about how they would portray kind of the movie musicalness of this world. And also I don't necessarily view Timothée Chalamet as a musical theater actor, but I don't know. I was very pleasantly surprised. I mean, a lot of the music stuck in my head for weeks, if not months after, like the noodle,
Yes.
apple strudel, like something like that one's just so catchy. And I think the music was definitely the thing that I was most pleasantly surprised that I liked and enjoyed and thought that it carried the film in a way that I didn't think it would.
Absolutely agreed, especially given the context of like this film came out around the same time as Mean Girls came out, the new Mean Girls.
Right.
And both of those films were marketed as not really being musical. Like the marketing was trying to, it was a little bit trying to trick audiences into not knowing that it was a musical or like barely knowing that it was a musical. And I remember that being something that I personally, was kind of harping on. And I know a lot of other people were harping on about like, well, hey, if you don't want to make a musical, if you think audiences don't like musicals, then don't make a musical.
Right.
But if you are, market it as such.
I agree.
With Mean Girls, I think it's different because I do think they needed to be more obvious about that because there were genuinely people who really didn't know and went in and were like, oh, God, this is a musical. Now everything's changed for me.
Right.
But with Wonka, it was a bit redeemed for me because I think I kind of caught on to that part of the marketing and I looked into it more anyways. So I was going to know that regardless. But then also I rewatched the original Wonka movie, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that we grew up with.
The Johnny Depp version?
Not the Johnny Depp, before that.
Oh, the Gene Wilder version.
Yes, the Gene Wilder version. I would consider that the one that I guess mostly grew up on, and then I kind of more grew up on Johnny Depp. But regardless, so I rewatched that one, and I rewatched the Johnny Depp one. When I rewatched that one, the Gene Wilder one, I was like, this is also a musical. And I feel like I forgot that it was a musical. And I remember I literally texted you, and I was like, I fucking forgot that OG Willy Wonka was a musical.
Right.
So it makes sense. It fits a lot more into the world that way. And I think it redeems the fact that it wasn't marketed as a musical because it kind of should go a little bit without saying.
I agree. I think what makes it different from the Mean Girls movie, and if we're talking about the whole kind of movie musical genre, is you go into Mean Girls, like if anyone talks about Mean Girls, they'll most likely be referencing the movie, not the Broadway musical. And anyone that would be looking at the trailer, seeing that, oh, they're making a Mean Girls remake, they think, oh, they're remaking the original film from what, like 2007 or 8 or 2, whatever, as opposed to doing the movie, or as opposed to doing the adaptation of the Broadway musical. But I feel like what you said, if you're making another Wonka movie, I would expect there to be music, 100%. Because there was music in the original with Gene Wilder, there was music in the newer version with Johnny Depp. Like, music, I feel like, is very fundamental throughout the film because it's so whimsical and magical and weird and at times very scary. So I went into it knowing that there was going to be music, and especially with, I feel like a lot of movie musicals these days look like the Wonka movie. And I can be a little bit more specific, but like they have that kind of big blockbuster movie musical look. They kind of all have the same.
A lot of jib shots.
A lot of wide, kind of big Panavision framed like musical numbers that are very symmetrical, and they all have like the same color scheme too. Like I saw people on Twitter talking about the new Wicked movie trailer, which I'm very excited for. So no hate, but they all kind of look the same in terms of like the color scheme and it looks like they had similar storyboards that they were trying to hit. And sure, maybe there's like a formula that studios as large as Warner Brothers kind of have to need, but yeah, so.
I agree.
I loved
There's
it, yeah.
a little bit of a formula to modern musicals in that way, at least in the production design and the look of it all, which is totally valid because I think we're in an era of rediscovering movie musicals.
I agree.
And I think part of that whole process is the marketing being kind of like, I don't know if people want to watch musicals anymore. And we had La La Land several years ago that was incredibly successful.
Right.
There have been a handful of incredibly successful musicals since then. In the Heights is one that comes to mind. That one was great, and that one did really well. But we haven't quite found our footing. And I think we're a couple years from like really finding a new renaissance of musicals. And I'm sure that many of those musicals will be, ones that either were already done or are already on the stage. But I'm also sure that we're gonna have a handful of original musicals. Or I guess I should say, I hope we have a handful of original musicals.
I was just about to say, I really hope we do too. Because I feel like a lot of the movie musicals we're seeing are kind of stage adaptations of the musicals, which is great. And as a theater lover, I love to see that. But theater is different from film. They're two different mediums. And I feel like what was really successful about La La Land, and as I'm literally saying this, I have a giant La La Land poster in my room.
Yes.
Blowing lots of wonderful kisses to La La Land is like my favorite movie of all time. And I think why I loved it and why I think most people, I hope, did, and why it got so much recognition, or positive recognition, is because it was original, but it also drew from older musicals that were the foundation of movie musicals. Like it touched on like Singing in the Rain a little bit and the dancing of guys and dolls. And
do you know, while you're talking about La La Land, do you know about the Umbrellas of Cherbourg?
That sounds very familiar, but please explain.
Okay, so I only found this out a couple years ago because a friend of mine, we were going through and watching some really good art house films.
Okay.
He has a taste more for art house. I have a taste more for blockbuster. So we were kind of like swapping movie recommendations and watching them together.
Yep.
And we watched this movie called The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. It's a French movie. It's a musical. The whole thing is sung. Like there's not a single line in there that's not sung. And so it's not necessarily like song, moment, song. It's more just like the whole thing is kind of
like an opera?
I mean, it's not in the style of opera, but it's that same, I guess I should say it's not in the musical style of an opera, but I think it's in that sort of formula of an opera.
Yeah.
But it was really good. I watched that film. It was really interesting. It was really fun. And at the end of it, I was like, wait, this was probably a huge inspiration for La La Land. It's not the same story, so it's not like, oh, I feel like it's a ripoff.
Right.
But there's a lot of similarities to it where I was like, I bet Damien Chazelle watched this movie or heard about this movie at some point, and this was part of the inspiration.
I agree. Yeah.
So if you ever want to look it up, it'd be fun to...
I will add to my list. I'll add to my list.
Hell yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, also just like on the musical of it all, I was very worried about Timothée Chalamet in this because I didn't know anything about his singing ability or dancing ability or lack thereof. And I will say I was probably a little bit more critical in the very beginning. Because, when you first start watching a movie...
Because he opens it. Yeah, he opens the film.
You're like, I'm ready to hate this. Every single note that you don't hit in the way that I like, right? I'm just going to say, like, you suck.
I want to hate the A-list actor. Like,
yeah, we're all terribly built that way to an extent.
Oh, yes.
But I loved it. I think he did a great job. And I think he did a great job in the realm of, like, I wouldn't go around the world and say that Timothée Chalamet is the greatest singer of all time or anything. But it worked for the film. Right. It worked for the character. I enjoyed the movie. I had a good time. So
I think so too. And I feel like we didn't need him to be a Broadway level singer, dancer. Like, I think a lot of great actors with proper training and dedication and ambition, they can do a movie musical. And I think an example, I mean, I love her voice. She's not the strongest singer in the world, but like Emma Stone, who I adore, she's fantastic in La La Land. She won an Oscar or whatever. But she's not like, what's her name? Like Judy Garland. She doesn't have the pipes as she does. And Timothée Chalamet is a fantastic actor, and he brought his A game to the singing and the dancing, and I thought it was very endearing. And I feel like even if you think of it in the Wonka universe, I feel like Willy Wonka wouldn't have an incredible, like, Hugh Jackman level voice. I feel like his voice is meant to be more kind of digestible and more
literally
more like more toxic, like sweet and endearing, and as if a chocolatier was singing to you, which is what is happening in the film. So to me that I didn't feel like his vibrato is XYZ, like he needs to sing this well. It's like, no, I thought he did great. The dance numbers were so much fun, and yeah, you could definitely tell that he put a lot of work into it. And I also believe that you can, unless they're tone deaf, you can teach anyone to sing or dance or act.
Unless their name is Kim Labick, which we've kind of just... No.
Kim?
I did my time in musical theater. Look, I did my time, okay? And my backstory with that, loosely, is that I tried to audition for the lead role when I was, like, way too young and way too inexperienced. But I was like, oh, of course I want to be the lead role. So I publicly auditioned. We love your ambition
and dedication. Look at you.
Yeah, I auditioned for the lead role in this musical in high school when I was way too young and didn't know anything. And I kind of choked on stage, and that kind of scarred me for a while because I was literally listening to myself for the first time out of the shower kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I'm not good.
Hey, well.
And everyone's hearing me be not good. But, I did chorus, I did plays, I did other stuff. I definitely found my place of what works for me and what I'm good at. And I, for years and years, was just terrified to sing in front of anybody. And so I wouldn't. And just recently, I've finally started to kind of get over that and be like, it doesn't matter. It's fine. I don't need to be a great singer, or if I'm okay, that's fine. If I'm bad, that's fine. Yeah. Just, let it out when you got to let it out.
Well, this podcast is a safe space, so you are more than willing to sing the noodle song. Please enlighten everyone. Please enlighten all the listeners. We want. Yeah,
let me just put myself on mute really quick and
let's just blast it. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I want to kind of slide over for a second and talk about some of the other characters in this film. Because again, this being a prequel that was just based on one character and didn't really have any other, original source to pull from, there were a lot of really good standout characters. And I think I can't choose a favorite, but I will say I specifically wrote a little checkbox on here that I wanted to talk about Slugworth. Because Slugworth was played by Patterson Joseph. Incredible. Incredible. The moment his first scene, I was like, I'm sold on this man. I need to see him in every slightly silly movie from now until the end of time. He And I literally wrote this exact sentence on my notes, right? I wrote, he ate that roll harder than Augustus Gloop ate that chocolate river. 10 out of 10.
He did. He ate it up. All three of the villains did. All of them did.
Yeah, they were so fun.
Right?
And I think it's like part of that is your willingness and flexibility as an actor to go that far. Mm-hmm. And also your director's ability to be like, you have the freedom to be silly. Like,
right?
There are some directors who make children's films that just can't quite allow or reach that level of fun that you need to. Mm-hmm. And in this one, I think they did. I think they reached it. And
I think what's really unique about the side characters is that they were kind of your, I don't want to say stereotypical because that alludes to it being cookie cutter and not creative, but they really fit the mold of kind of like a stereotypical villain or like a side character that goes with Willie on his adventures, but they did it so well. And you could tell that all the actors there were having a lot of fun. Like, the villains were conniving and evil, but they were just so creative, and it looked like they were having fun doing that. And they weren't totally just like evil the whole time. They were whimsical at times, kind of creative and funny. And I want to give a special shout out to Olivia Colman in this film. Like, I mean, I think we can all agree that she can never do wrong, right? She's fantastic in everything that she does. And I just want to know the prosthetics and the teeth and everything that went into her physical transformation for this film. But she very much reminded me of a character from Les Mis, like the live action Les Mis from like, I guess like 10 years ago now, like 2013, 2014. Like the kind of the wretched old women who talk like this kind of thing. And I don't know, she was very much like also like a Miss Hannigan from Annie.
Yeah, that's like, exactly who I was thinking. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
She was great. Oh my God. And it's like, okay, so Olivia Colman, right? Sidetrack for a second. Mm-hmm. If we have a movie with Olivia Colman and Meryl Streep in it, I don't know if I'm going to survive that.
No. I don't think the industry, no one will. No one will.
we're like, this is it. Nobody can make another movie.
That's the last film. That is the last film ever.
The last movie. Yeah, she was incredible. And, you know, even just like all of these different side stories, because our main story with Wonka, of course, is Willy Wonka goes to the city, tries to make it big, has a hard time, finally makes it big, kind of thing.
Like everyone in LA.
Yeah, like everyone in like La La Land.
Yep,
like
exactly.
How it goes. But we had all these really great side stories that perfectly tied into his story and really built the world around him. And again, were just so fun to watch. Like her and the other guy whose name I'm forgetting, they're sort of like fake love story.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. That was so fun. I was like, right? I was ready for every scene that they had them in. Mm-hmm. That was a good time. I could write fan fiction about them for sure.
Right.
If I had the time, if I had the motivation.
Get the Wattpad out and we're writing that story right now as we speak.
We're doing it. Copywritten. This is us. Nobody else can write fan fiction about these two characters.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. And everyone, all the other characters in the, what would you describe that they were living in? Like a motel sort of thing? Yeah, but stuck forever. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's basically hell.
Yeah. I don't know. I just thought they were all so sweet. And I don't know. I feel like I sometimes have a hard time rooting for supporting characters because they're not given enough time in the film to kind of develop and become cared for by the audience. But I feel like these characters, the ones that are kind of help Willie on his brick and mortar candy shop or chocolate factory, I don't know, I really cared for them in the end. And I don't know, I wanted to see them thrive even though I didn't know too much about them. And I think that's A, good acting, and B, I just think good direction, good storytelling. And yeah, I don't know. I love them.
Yeah, I would also agree because, you know, that is a side story that definitely could have gotten really watered down and could have been more like, yeah, we just have these characters here to help them that one time. But no, I totally agree. Like I haven't seen the movie since I first watched it a few months back. And I can like very clearly envision little moments with them that I was like, oh, that was such a fun moment. And especially like the window scene. They're all like looking out the windows.
I was just about to mention that. Yes.
Yeah. It was beautifully like cinematography, lighting, all that stuff. Beautifully well done. It gave me like hints of Peter Pan, and maybe that's just because
Oh,
I
yeah, yeah.
so strongly associate Peter Pan with like the nighttime window thing.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
But it gave me like good hints of Peter Pan, and it was like a little, again, it was like a little silly because if you're, basically an indentured servant for this motel, you're not necessarily going to have like all your windows lined up right next to each other to talk to each other. But it's hard to explain sometimes why something is good. You just feel it. And that was a moment where I was like, I felt it.
Yeah. And I think back to like little moments that felt very cinematic and beautiful to watch. One of my favorite moments of the film was, I think this was after they had escaped the zoo or somewhere kind of in the middle of the film, where they were dancing on the rooftops of the buildings, and they were kind of being floated up by like a balloon or something like that. Like they were kind of walking on like the glass ceiling of kind of the main town square. I don't know. I felt that scene was just so magical. It felt very Disney.
Yeah.
Like felt very much like Peter Pan, Mary Poppins, and I don't know. It was so fun, and just I don't know. Like moments like that really put a smile on my face. That makes me love film, and I just loved that scene. Like, and they I remember they're like kind of holding hands. This is Willy Wonka and Noodle, and they're kind of spinning around, and I don't know. I loved that part.
Yeah. As an adult, and especially us as film people who literally work on film sets, watch films all the time, to go into any movie, whether you like it or not, you kind of start critiquing it from the beginning.
Oh, 100%.
It's really hard to drop that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So for this film, I just fell into it. Like I fell into the film, and instead of like critiquing it and instead of thinking at it from a point of like, oh, does this story make sense? Does this and that and whatever? I just enjoyed it. I just had a fun time. And that's what you need to do with a film like this. And then you can finally like, once it's all said and done and you're like, oh, hell yeah, I had a fun time. Then you can kind of look back and be like, yeah, this was great. This was great. Versus there's other kid-centered films that have come out recently that I think they just don't know how to do that, how to like take you into the world. They just kind of lose you. And a lot of it is then tied to like story stuff that doesn't make any sense. And yeah, I don't know. It's very tough.
I feel like studios and writers and directors sometimes don't realize how smart kids are.
Yeah. That's a huge factor.
And I feel like a lot of the reasons why kids might love movies like Toy Story or Up or Moana is because A, they're good films, and B, they bring a lot to the table, but C, adults love them too because we know that they're good and well-made movies for children. Like, you go with your family, and I feel like Wonka is a good example of a movie that, yes, is more catered to younger audiences, but they did a really good job of catering it to younger audiences that people like us, adults that normally would see more sophisticated films, really liked this movie. And something that I also want to talk about quickly is the location of where this world is. Because to me, like, I was paying a lot of attention to the set design and the overall production design because I thought it was so animated and expensive. Like, you could tell there's a lot of money put into this film. And my mom and I were kind of chatting about that. And we were like, is it kind of a mix between London and Paris? But that kind of town square kind of looks like that really big fancy mall in Milan that has all those bougie stores. And I don't know, it just kind of it was almost like a faux London, but a little bit bougier like Paris. I don't know. So I want to know kind of where you imagined this to be.
Okay. No, that's good. Because I think my brain really definitely slotted it in London. I think partially because of the Olivia Colman of it all. Her accent being so thick and so, I don't know what the technical dialect is for that type
like a Cockney. Yeah.
Like a Cockney.
Cockney accent, yeah, well, mate.
Yeah. So I think that for me stuck it really as like, oh, this must be like a little bit of a cleaner London. But I get what you're saying about there were elements of maybe even just the lighting style that made it feel a little bit more Paris, a little bit more beautiful in that way. And yeah, as far as I can remember, it never really stuck you in like, oh, this has to be a certain city.
Right.
It is very vague, and I think that's intentional.
And at times the location was very romantic. Like the lighting
Yeah.
was very moody, but not dramatic. But it also had a little bit of steampunk kind of like in the interiors, like
Yeah.
with those giant safe in the bank and when they got stuck in the big chocolate well in the end and
Yeah.
almost okay, I will say that part in the end where they almost like suffocated in chocolate, I literally was like,
That got dark.
I was like, are they gonna get out of this? Like that sounds like drowning is terrible in and of itself, but drowning in chocolate, that stuff is thick. That stuff is
That
very
stuff is
thick.
thick. And also for the chocolate cartel trio to
Right?
be like so heavily like, our stash of chocolate is our power and our wealth. To then be like, let's drown these people in our
Right?
money. I'm like, you've just tainted the chocolate. But also, I feel like such an idiot. I did not notice this until the second that I'm talking about it. But that's got to be like the basic inspiration for later down the line when Willy Wonka drowns kids in chocolate.
Yeah. And
Oh my God. So he was like traumatized by that moment?
yeah.
And he was like, I have to repeat this.
Well, something I noticed is, you know, that shot where he's literally covered in chocolate and he's like outside
And looks crazy.
Yeah, and he kind of has his eyes looking up, and you're kind of like, what's he gonna do?
Yeah.
That part specifically reminded me of in the second Willy Wonka movie when Augustus is covered in the chocolate.
Yes.
And I saw a lot of like little snippets of movie parallels from each movie, or from the original in I think the 70s into the one in the 2000s, because I think the filmmakers knew that they weren't really they were essentially creating their own film. Like Timothée Chalamet created his own Willy Wonka. I didn't feel like I was seeing a younger Johnny Depp or a younger Gene Wilder Wonka. Like this to me felt very much a film in and of itself, which I liked personally. I didn't want there to be, because we already got a backstory in the second Willy Wonka movie, and then in the first one, we didn't really need it. Like this to me, this is like a different story.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, if you are going to follow up the Gene Wilder one with a direct prequel to that, I mean, the internet knows this. You had to have casted Jeremy Allen White. It needed to be Jeremy Allen White.
Yes.
But they were like, no, not Jeremy Allen White. Timothée Chalamet, because he's his own thing.
Right? But I don't know if the filmmakers had this in mind, but I was a little curious to see what the correlation between Timothée Chalamet's Wonka, this very bubbly, kind, hopeful Willy, and then you see Gene Wilder's Wonka, which tends to be a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more haunted by his past, and he kind of takes it out on children and the families. I wonder if they were thinking like, how did Willy become the kind of the creepy Wonka in the original? I'm not sure, but because they talk a little bit about that in the second movie. But this one, to me, it's like, I cannot imagine Timothée Chalamet's Wonka being anything but kind and respectful to people, to him welcoming people into his world.
I could see him being a little bit haunted. I could see him having like a little
trauma here and there.
Yeah, a little trauma. And I think like a dabble, right? Like a polite little dabble of trauma.
Yeah.
Partially because of the scene that we just talked about, the almost drowning to death in a bunch of chocolate. I think if your whole life is based on creating chocolate and you have a near-death experience in a pile of chocolate, like
I
that,
see you.
You know, it might not directly affect you right then and there, and it might take a minute. But there are going to be points at which you are making chocolate where you're like, this is a food which equals energy, but it is also, it almost killed me. So there's a little bit of weirdness in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think that's such an interesting thing to think about, is like what this Willy Wonka would become. I don't know. And I think it still fits very much in the character, which is, again, the whole thing, right? We're talking about the fact that this is a fresh prequel built off of an already existing character. I think it fits well. I think if you're writing fan fiction specifically about this Willy Wonka, it fits in the world of any fan fiction you'd write about another young Willy Wonka.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know if they drew a lot from the book, like the original book, which I have not read in years, so I can't really provide any insight on that. But I think, I can't remember what they said, but I do remember the director was talking about how they really wanted to create their own Wonka story. Like they wanted to kind of do the book justice and the story of Wonka justice without drawing too much from the existing films.
Which is great, and which is part of the reason why I think this film was so well done, is because there was a lot more freedom in that adaptation. Even when, if you compare this film for a second to Cruella, right? Because Cruella was
that film.
I love that movie too.
So good.
If you compare it with Cruella, which Cruella was also a prequel film based off of an already existing character, and we didn't really know her backstory, so there was a ton of freedom to figure out like what happened to her, how did she become who she is today, and again, I also really like that film. I will say though, I think if you didn't have to make it a Cruella film, if you could just make it any kind of film, I think it would have been better, because ultimately there were moments in that film that I didn't like, and it was purely because they had to have it in there to relate it to the character of Cruella. Like some of the stuff with just the actual Dalmatian dogs. I feel like if they didn't have those moments, perfect movie. But they had to ultimately tie it back into, well, this is why she hates puppies and skins puppies.
I agree. That part felt very forced. It's like, oh, it's because didn't they like, spoiler, but didn't they like kill her mom or something like that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, they like, yeah. I agree. When I saw that, I was like, I could tell, I can hear the writing room, the writer's room right now being like, oh God, hey y'all, we forgot to add the Dalmatian part, one of the most significant parts of her original story. And they're like, how about we just like sprinkle this in, and then they somehow wove it into the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cruella is one of the better live action Disney adaptations.
Absolutely agreed. And to bring it back to Wonka, again, this film is, we've said it before, we'll say it again, such a loose adaptation because you really only have a handful of things you know about this character, and it's kind of like, we don't know where he came from. We don't know how he started, so go crazy. So there weren't any of those limitations. Really, the only limitations were he likes to make chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
That's
literally it, yeah.
So they're like, okay, we can do whatever we want. And that helps so much because then you have all this freedom to be like, I'm creating this world, and the only boundaries I have are like this one kind of thing to tie it all in and the general vibe of the character.
Yeah.
And then you can play with it. It's like a playground.
And I feel like that gave Timothée Chalamet a lot to play with here, because I'm sure from his standpoint as an actor, no one wants to like redo someone's role like that. That's no fun. And so I bet a lot of I'm assuming the directors and producers and executives told him, hey, this is a pretty original story we're going to do. I want you to have fun with this and create your own version of Willy Wonka. And I think that's why a lot of us liked it, was because it felt like it was his. He was not trying to be someone who portrayed the role before. He wasn't trying to make the movie anything like the originals. Like, it was very much a product of itself, which is good. And I feel like that definitely comes off on the screen.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I think his character had so much heart, not only because of the story that they laid out specifically for Willy Wonka, but also because of, again, the characters around him that he interacted with. All of the people at that sort of, again, hotel motel place, the kind of like the Mrs. Hannigan type, even his interactions with her, like ultimately he was mostly polite to her and, gave her the benefit of the doubt despite her scary accent and demeanor in the beginning. We always saw him as trying to do the right thing. And when he wasn't doing the right thing, he would kind of figure it out, have that moment and grow. And that's literally what you need with a protagonist anyways. Right? That's the whole point, is to show this growth. But I don't know, it was great. Oh, and especially Noodle and her whole backstory. Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
I loved it. Their whole dynamic was beautiful because it felt so rich and so real. And she was a very perfect, well-rounded character. I love all of the layers that we saw of her. And when we finally got to the end, I was like, it's been a long time since she's had a special her scene moment. We got to have some kind of wrap up. And they did. They had the perfect, we found her. It's going to be kind of awkward, but here you go.
Kind of cheesy, but we loved that. Yes.
Yeah, it was everything it needed to be.
To me, Noodle's character is the physical embodiment of everything that the five naughty children are not. from the original. Like, to me,
Yes.
Noodle is selfless. She's kind. She's not greedy. Like, she's essentially like the knot of each of those 5 kids. And I feel like that's why Willy Wonka was so just enjoyed her presence and cared for her so much, was because she was a kind human being that helped him out. I mean, she literally, the first thing that she did was try to help him out in the beginning by saying like, hey, don't sign, like, read the fine print. Like, don't sign it just because it seems like a good deal. Yeah. So I don't know.
And he was like, LOL, I can't read.
Yeah. And then she's like, well, I'll see you in a few. We'll be roommates now. But yeah, she was lovely. The actress was great. She was adorable. And yeah, it was good.
Absolutely. So I want to just make another note about the chocolate cartel. I guess I just want to say, like, this is probably obvious, but I'm really happy that they had it be not 1 character, but 3. Because it could have just been Slugworth. And he was a character that was adapted from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, as we know. It's not the same exact character, but it's sort of, I think it's meant to be just like his earlier successor kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it could have just been Slugworth, or it could have just been one of these other guys, but it was 3. And I think that was a very good choice, because ultimately the comment there is less about, oh, you're going to have competition when you're coming up in a business. And it's more of, the competition is the fact that a small group of people monopolize the industry and have a stranglehold on it.
Yeah.
So it's not just like there's one big bad guy. It's a very clear, like, hey, there are 3 bad guys who are actually part of the same problem. So I thought that was really well done. Yeah. And then, of course, tying in the cops of it all, the Keegan-Michael Key of it all.
Oh, he was hilarious.
Also,
yes.
He was so good.
Right?
Oh my God. He is also another actor that I'm like, please be in every children's film from now until forever. Like, he was in Toy Story too.
As who? In the 4th one?
He was one of the... Yes.
Oh, I didn't see that.
That's okay. The only good part is literally him and Jordan Peele, because they play these like theme park prize toys.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, so like kind of like polyester, kind of like overly fluffy, but they're so funny.
Yeah, back on the cartel thing, or just the villains themselves, their trio reminded me of... You've seen Fantastic Mr. Fox, right?
I haven't, but it's interesting you mentioned that. Roald Dahl also wrote Fantastic Mr. Fox, the original.
Really? That was a book? Oh.
Yeah.
I literally thought that Wes Anderson wrote that and created that whole story. It seems like one that he would, but I don't. They might have drawn from that, but in Fantastic Mr. Fox, there are these 3 villains that are... I haven't seen the movie in a long time. I don't think they're all part of the same... Actually, I think they are kind of a monopoly together, and they run some sort of system, but like they're reminding me of that because it's like they ran their industry and did not let anybody else in, similar to how the cartel was in Wonka. And yeah, so if any listeners have seen not Moonrise Kingdom, have seen Fantastic Mr. Fox, let me know if you agree with that similarity, because that's something I kind of realized. I was like, they kind of reminded me of that trio.
Yeah. No, that's a really cool, and especially knowing that, like, I think that's a crazy thing too, that you discovered that this was, because I had this knowledge written down in my little bullet points, that this was one of the other stories that he wrote.
And I did not know that. Maybe they drew from that, and they...
Well, that's what I'm thinking now that we're talking about it, is like, you made such a strong connection with a very specific story. And I'm wondering, like, is this part of when the filmmakers were, when the screenwriter was writing the script, that they took inspiration from just other ideas, concepts of his stories to kind of pull from in a way that kept it still very true to, like, his authorship. But I can't say for sure, but I would say what we just had, that moment of like,
you're like,
figuring this out, kind of makes me think that that's likely for sure.
I can see it, because it seems like the writers for this were very intentional on what they were doing in terms of the little callbacks, yes, like the little callbacks.
Come on, musical theater guy,
right? I gotta refresh my memory on that. But I guess like the little callbacks you see from the original films, and I guess a sprinkle of, to what we can believe, his other stories like Fantastic Mr. Fox or Matilda or something like that. So yeah, maybe they were inspired by Matilda's character and her strong will and her power into Noodle. I'm not sure. We could go on a whole tangent about
Do
that.
you know that he wrote Matilda?
Yeah, yes, I do. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I was like, wouldn't that be so funny if this was the second thing?
No, I know that I love Matilda. That's one of my favorite movies and one of my favorite books growing up. Yeah, because those were kind of his two most popular ones, right? Like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory,
Yeah.
Matilda, James and the Giant Peach, right?
This is a perfect moment for me to segue to my favorite bullet point on my notes.
Okay.
Here's where we get some crazy shit. The segue is by the end of it, I mentioned a few of the things that he wrote, which pretty much all of them we've just said now, but this gives me an opportunity to segue over to some of the crazy stuff. So I just want to talk for a quick minute about Roald Dahl. And I think I'm pronouncing that right. Roald. Ronaldo without
I thought
the
it was
end.
Rawld. Like
Roald?
Rawld, like Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl.
Roald Dahl. That's so hard to
Yeah.
say.
Well, that's
I'm
because
a terrible English speaker. So we'll just call him Mr. Dahl. So Mr. Dahl has a really interesting backstory. And here's just a couple of fun facts about him. He was a pilot and a lieutenant in World War II
Wow.
in the number 80 Squadron of the British Royal Air Force. The squadron itself was based in Athens when he first joined, and at some point, after an attack by German forces, the squadron was reassembled in Haifa, Palestine, where they committed, right after they landed in Palestine. I don't know if it was specifically a base there or if it was sort of just like hey, we're stopping here to regroup, because I couldn't fully find that information. So reassembled in Haifa, Palestine, where they then went off to commit an invasion on Syria and Lebanon. Dahl also later moved to the U.S. and acted as a secret liaison between Washington and Winston Churchill. And he was basically kind of also a part of the British spy
FBI,
group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Post-war, he settled down and got married, had some kids. One of his kids suffered from hydrocephalus, which I actually know a little bit about this. A friend of mine has hydrocephalus. It's basically, the gist of it is something happens. It can also happen during birth, but the gist is that there's too much fluid in the brain and it can cause a lot of difficulties. So one of his kids suffered from hydrocephalus and he ended up helping develop a cerebral shunt, I believe it's called, a cerebral shunt invention to help with that. That ultimately helped, I think it was over 3,000 children or something. It was like a big number.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a
So when did
kind
he
of
write
fun
these books?
fact.
Like later in his life, or?
Yeah, so there's like one or two more things, and then I just drop a couple of the books. I don't know when he wrote all these books. I do know when he wrote one of them. But, one of his kids had hydrocephalus. Another of his kids later died from measles, and so he became very vocal about immunizations. Yeah. And I think he wrote also a whole book about measles and get your kid vaccinated kind of thing. Yeah, so there's just a bunch of odd, interesting, wild facts about this guy. And within all of that, he wrote books such as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, as we know, Fantastic Mr. Fox. He wrote the Gremlins original book. The Gremlins is loosely based on his book.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
It's a great film.
He also co-wrote the screenplay for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which I didn't know.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah.
Also terrified me as a child, but a very, very good movie.
The guy who sneaks you in.
The child snatcher. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Talk about
Scarred for life.
Biggest fear as a kid was to get kidnapped. As with most children, I would assume, but that character just skyrocketed that fear.
He's like Candy Fingers or whatever it was. Ugh. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he co-wrote the screenplay for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and also posthumously he wrote and then died, and then they published what he wrote, which was a children's book about railway safety.
Oh.
Yeah, so this guy was all over the fucking place. Mm-hmm. Children's books here, railway safety there, measles, hydrocephalus invention,
screenplay,
World War II things, and it was just crazy. And one of the things too that I also found interesting about this guy, with all the World War II stuff, it's very funny to me that he had such an active time in the military, specifically because when he was a kid, he was in this boarding school that he fucking hated. He was like, everybody, like, people beat each other up. It's a horrible place. It's a bad time. I don't like this. So that was like a part of his childhood. And within that was actually part of the inspiration for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Because apparently Cadbury, and specifically Mr. Cadbury, I guess, you know, famous chocolate guy, would send boxes of chocolates to these kids in this boarding school as like a way to test these chocolates of if they were good or terrible or killed people or, you know, poison them. According to the lore, Dahl would imagine himself inventing a chocolate bar that would impress Mr. Cadbury. And so that was like this like imaginative hope that he held on to. And that was clearly part of the inspiration for the character of Willy Wonka.
Oh.
But it's crazy to me too that like that was the childhood and then grow up to be like a World War II fighter pilot. What happened in between when you were a kid?
Quite the life, yes.
Yeah. Absolutely wild.
And when did he die?
Oof. Is it lazy to say 19 something? November of 1990.
Okay.
Not bad.
Yeah.
He had a pretty solid life. Yeah. He was 70-ish, 74.
It's not bad. I mean, he wrote one of the greatest novels of all time. I don't even want to categorize it as just a kid's book, but everyone knows this story. Everyone, I think, loves it. I love it. It's a great... Who doesn't love Willy Wonka? It's such a fun story and a fun, creative concept that, I don't know, I feel like has a lot to say. I mean, to me, the story is about parenting and like how a parent can like affect a child, and I don't know, the parenting thing. I don't know. I haven't thought too critically of it, but to me, that's how I always kind of view the story, was like the children are a product of bad parenting and just awful attitudes and everything, and kind of teaching children how to be kind and respectful and selfless and everything. So, yeah.
I would agree. I think there's still moments of the story, and especially of some of our adaptations, that are kind of not amazing, kind of problematic. And that's also why I would say I think this story is great, because it tries to eliminate some of those things. It doesn't do a perfect job. I mean, nothing ever does, but it definitely takes a step forward. No kids die in this movie. Yeah. That's one good thing.
They get close, but they don't die.
They get close. They get emotionally scarred, but, you know, no death. So that's good. But we do have another, like, kind of slightly dark note, a bit of a controversy. So a little bit of a controversy around the Oompa Loompas of it all. Because I think there's one British actor in particular who he's quoted as saying, "A lot of actors with dwarfism feel like we are being pushed out of the industry we love. A lot of people, myself included, argue that dwarfs should be offered everyday roles in dramas and soaps, but we aren't getting offered those roles. One door is being closed, but they have forgot to open the next one." And I would completely agree with that statement. I think he puts it perfectly about the fact that, like, you know, stories like this, stories that have characters who are Oompa Loompas, who historically were cast more as little people, and even stories like there was a whole thing too with Snow White, right? Which Snow White is, of course, Snow White is infamously the seven dwarfs, and while there's a lot that is inherently problematic about that and the original story, it's right to say that you can improve upon these stories and you can right these wrongs without then taking away jobs from people who, you know, those are some of, not the only roles, but kind of the only roles that they get nowadays.
Yeah, that was a big, I don't know if discourse is the right word, but that was a big controversy, things people were talking about. Because I feel like when this trailer came out was also when the, I guess, promo photos for Snow White, the new adaptation, came out. And it was a lot on like the seven dwarves are not played by little people, but played by non-little people. And a lot of people were talking about like, oh, I felt upset because those, as you mentioned, those roles would have normally been taken up by those in the community. But then some other little people had said, like, we don't want those roles. We want the dramatic roles. We don't want to. So I see the two sides of it. I think some people were saying, and I'm not a little person, so I don't necessarily have obviously a say in this, but so I'm kind of expressing what I've seen both sides. But what are your thoughts on Hugh? Was it Hugh Grant? Is that who played the Oompa Loompa? Yeah. Like, how did you kind of go about him playing the Oompa Loompa?
Yeah, I think it's, I would agree kind of with the sentiment you've got and the sentiment that, this actor with the quote has, where we can recognize that having these stereotypical roles in place just because we're doing another prequel or another sequel or whatever doesn't make it better. Like, if the story improves upon these characters and allows them a more well-rounded and less stereotypical experience, that's better. I guess I would say that. I would say firsthand, if you're having a story like Snow White, like, a Willy Wonka story where Oompa Loompas are included, whatever, at the very least, improve upon those characters, allow them more screen time, like give them a more well-rounded story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is not just like, like you're not just like giving them the same character that everyone always plays kind of thing. So again, at the very least, improve their characters, improve that role for them. But also, again, that's like a quarter of a step forward. Like, we're trying to get a full step forward and so on and so forth. I think in some ways the industry has gotten a quarter of a step forward. But the problem is any step forward that we've gotten has been given straight to Peter Dinklage. And I love him and he's incredible. And get all the roles. But it can't just be Peter Dinklage, right? It has to be more people. So again, the bigger step forward is opening those roles, even just opening casting, right? Being able to be like, hey, we've got 6 characters in this movie. And while we've kind of got an idea of who they are, please, everybody come audition, regardless of, whatever you look like, whatever your background is. And we're just going to find a great actor who fits that role. I think that's part of, again, the full step forward. We're getting a quarter of the step forward in some ways. But then in this kind of instance, I think the Hugh Grant of it all, I'm not really happy about it. Kind of because, again, it is taking away a role from somebody else who could play it and who could have that moment to shine in their career. I think what really seals the deal for me that makes this like not a great moment to this film is the fact that Hugh Grant notoriously hated that role. He was kind of like, oh, I played an Oompa Loompa and it sucked. I would never do it again. And like, that hurts, right? Like I'm not a little person, but if I was, I think that would really fucking hurt because I was like, not only did you take away this role from somebody who could use it as a stepping stone to the next thing, but you also just hated your time and you hated that role. So then like, why do that in the first place?
Yeah. And I think what's also interesting is their choice of like the Oompa Loompa in the original film and even in the remake from the Johnny Depp remake, the Oompa Loompas were life size, like like they were like exactly. You could interact with like in a space with them as you would any human being, but like Hugh Grant's Oompa Loompa, he was like he was almost miniature in a way, like he was more of a character, almost a little bit jarring to look at because you're like, that's Hugh Grant, but they made him into this little, just smaller I don't know. It was just it was just kind of strange to look at. And I think I would have much rather had, I don't know. It just felt a little bit forced in a way and a little bit, almost sometimes even a little offensive. I don't really know. But, and adding on to the whole thing with Hugh Grant, as you mentioned, he did not like this role. He was not happy on the press tour. And I think it would have been wonderful to get a little person to play this role. And hopefully if they were given the opportunity, even break away from the stereotypical Oompa Loompa characteristics and give that character a backstory, which they did a little bit. But even so, like seeing a little bit more into where do they come from? What's their story? What do they do? Like what's going on with them? I feel like they could have totally benefited from that. And it could have given a little person actor amazing screen time and hopefully more dramatic, comedic, whatever roles in the future for them.
Yeah. Again, the industry is always evolving, and while it evolves very slow, it does evolve. And so
it does, yes.
Yeah, I think anytime I talk about this kind of thing, regardless of what the subject matter is, it's always good to know that we are moving forward. It's an
Right,
incredibly slow process, and we have to keep pushing and we have to keep learning from each other to be just better people and
right,
better filmmakers.
right,
But, slowly but surely,
right.
we're taking one step forward and two steps back, and then one step forward
Mm-hmm.
and two steps
At least we're
back.
taking a step forward. At least we're taking a step forward.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that was kind of just I think that was really the only thing that I had about this film that I was like, mm-mm. Well, okay. Actually, there was like one other thing that I would like wag my finger at, so to speak. And it's so inconsequential. It's so like nothing at all. But the design and the aesthetics of the actual chocolates,
Mm.
I think they were too good, right? I think Willy Wonka was still
Oh.
learning. I think they needed to. It was like, oh my God, it was like, how in the Hunger Games when Peeta's hiding and his face is like covered
Oh
in
yeah.
camouflage, and they're like, how the fuck did he do like
Mm-hmm.
incredible camouflage makeup if his only skills are like
Mm-hmm.
cake
Bread
frosting?
making. Yeah, yeah.
It reminded me of that a little bit, where I was like, okay, the designer of these chocolates, like the actual real life person, designer of these chocolates, bravo, well done. You showed us. At the same time, I think Willy Wonka was still coming up. I mean, that was part of the whole point of him as a character in this
Mm-hmm.
prequel. And so I think I would have liked it if some of the chocolates that we saw in the beginning were a little bit
Mm.
more rough around the edges and also a little bit more like obvious in design.
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
like the silver lining one I think was really obvious in design.
Mm.
But yeah.
I agree that now that you bring that up, that is something that stood out to me a little bit because I think he had created the first chocolate for Noodle to try, and it looked like something straight out of like Harrods in London, like the really bougie
Yeah.
upscale store, like a beautiful, almost truffle, not even just chocolate, but like a truffle that
Yeah.
had been painted with edible gold and whatever, whatever. And I mean, maybe that kind of added to the whimsicalness of Willy Wonka and the film itself. But now that you mention it, I feel like it would have been kind of sweet, lack of a better word, but sweet. No
Perfect.
pun intended. I think it would have been sweet if if the chocolate was kind of, as I mentioned, rough around the edges, a little bit like not perfectly square, but almost kind of almost like bark. When how like sometimes like if you have like peppermint
Yeah.
bark where it's kind of oddly shaped and a little sanded on the side, like something like that.
Yes.
I feel like would have done his character well and Noodle's character well, but and then maybe it could have like progressed further. It's like, oh, this is like he's able to make this incredible piece of chocolate that looks pretty basic and not the most glamorous piece of chocolate, but he's capable of making the most beautiful looking piece of chocolate that tastes the same as the piece that might look like scrap. So
Yeah, absolutely. And then by the time we get to the grand opening of his shop, I think it would make that even more of a wow factor.
right,
Because
right.
you'd be
'Cause
like,
it's like
wow,
wow,
he's really come so far.
yeah, yeah. Or it's like look what he can do. This is
Yeah.
really special. Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. But, even then, that's like the tiniest little
yeah,
criticism I could have on
yeah.
this
I
movie.
didn't walk out of the theater going, you know what? That first piece of chocolate he made, like, come
You
on.
guys, the chocolates were too good. It wasn't on brand.
Yep.
But that's kind of all I had. Again, this whole film, like it's great that the filmmakers had so much freedom. And it's also cool that now that we've talked about it, we've found things that suggest that the screenwriters and the filmmakers paid maybe more attention to just how Roald Dahl writes in general and some of his other characters and inspirations to bring it to this, which makes it feel like it's just, I know this is going to sound silly, but it was a perfect Willy. And yes, I rhymed that totally intentionally.
Yes.
But I think, yeah, again, this film was really well done. I don't know. Do you have anything else that, good, bad, or otherwise that you want to say before we start tying this all up?
I was just very pleasantly surprised. I think I went into it skeptical, I think as a lot of us did, because I don't think the trailer did much for it, but it did get people talking, which I guess from a marketing standpoint that might be the best way to do things from now on is to create a trailer that isn't as thought-provoking or inviting to the story to get people talking and wondering what it's going to be like. But there were tons of kids in the theater that I was at, and they loved it. They were glued to the screen, which I feel like that's, if anyone's gonna need to like the movie, it's gonna be kids and their families. And I don't know, it added another element of respect for Timothée Chalamet as an actor and his versatility as an actor. So I really liked it.
Very well said. So it is now time for a movie theater butter pop quiz.
Ooh, okay.
Are you ready?
I'm nervous, but I'm ready.
Every time I do this, I don't have any sort of limits to these pop quiz.
Okay.
So sometimes it's like all over the place. So I have 3 questions for you.
Do I win chocolate in the end?
Yes, you win chocolate and a sticker, because now I owe you a sticker. That's the little logo for my podcast.
Wonderful.
Question number 1. What is Willy Wonka's dad's name?
Oh.
This is from the deep lore.
Oh, God.
I'll give you a hint.
Okay.
You know his last name. His first name.
Thank you.
Is
I hope it's Wonka.
Yeah. His first name is also the name of a famous pig.
Babe?
Like, no. There's like 2 famous pigs. The other one.
Pig. But I'm not wrong. Babe is a famous
Babe
pig.
is a famous pig. Yeah.
A famous pig.
I'm like holding up like a terrible W, and it's not helping at all.
My brain goes to Ham, the pig from Toy Story, who I would hope Willy Wonka's dad's name is not Ham, but
do you want me to tell you?
Yes, I don't know. Who is it?
His name is Wilbur Wonka.
Oh, Wilbur. Duh. Okay.
I know.
Okay.
I guess he's like the least famous out of all the famous pigs.
Okay, but I'll give you that one. That is a famous pig name.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That is a famous name for the pig. Famous pig.
So Willy Wonka's dad's name is Wilbur Wonka. And I believe that lore comes just straight from the Johnny Depp one, when we actually saw his character.
Oh.
He was like the abusive dentist dad.
You're so right.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
You should have known that.
Right? Okay, you know what? I should have done my homework better. Oh, okay, that's great. Okay, yeah, he's the dentist in the second version. Yes.
That was a good moment.
Mm-hmm.
Question number 2. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop?
The world may never know.
Damn, you know what? I'll give it to you. I would have also accepted 3, or I would have also accepted about 1,200, because I did count once when I was a kid, because I was very curious and very scientific. Yeah, I did like a tally mark system. It was great.
You must have also had the afternoon to yourself then, because that would take a long time.
Yeah. I was bored. I had a Tootsie Pop from Halloween candy, and we all had that question in the back of our minds, and I was like, shut up, I want to know the real answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the whole damn thing, and I remember it being about 1,200.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, because that commercial, I used to watch that all the time on like Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, where the little owl is like
Mr.
a 1,
Owl.
1, a 2, a 3. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? The world may never know.
Iconic. Absolutely iconic. All right. Question number 3. Are you ready? This is the hardest one of them all.
Oh, God.
What is your favorite form of chocolate?
That is the hardest question. Oh, my God. Okay. I'm going to say this because it has been something I've been craving recently. By recently, I mean the last week. Lava cake.
Oh,
I have been craving lava cake. I love chocolate cake and chocolate ice cream. I know a lot of people do not like chocolate ice cream. I feel like I know more people that really do not like it. I don't know why, but I love it. And I don't know. I adore chocolate lava cake. I think it's a great dessert. I feel like you can only find it at a steakhouse or like a cheesecake
like an
factory.
Applebee's type place.
Yeah, Chili's, those types of places. And I don't go a lot of those restaurants. Those aren't totally my vibe. But I've been craving a lava cake.
That's a really good
Now that
one.
I'm talking about it, I really want a lava cake
I know,
right now.
and now I'm like, damn it. Well, that's awesome. Next time we go see a movie, what we should do is go somewhere beforehand and have lava
We
cakes.
should. We should go to BJ's across the street.
Yes.
I'm sure they
Get a
have.
Pizookie.
Yeah, they've got to
Oh
have
my
lava
God.
cake. They you know
Yeah,
what?
for sure.
When we're done with this, I'm gonna look on the menu and confirm whether or not they have
Set it up.
Set it up. I'll get a reservation and everything, and we'll get some lava cake.
God, that'll be amazing. All right. Well, that was our movie theater butter pop quiz.
Woo!
You did wonderfully. You
Yes.
did great. 2 out of 3.
Two out of
Actually,
three.
3 out of 3. Whatever. We're not. The points don't matter. It's just like Whose Line. The points are made up. It doesn't matter.
Oh, so that first question stumped me very hard,
Yeah.
but good question.
Thank you. I was like, there's no way he's going to know this. And I love to just, ego show off my knowledge that I
Yes.
found out 10 minutes ago.
Yes.
And be like, how did you not know this?
How could you not know that his dad's name was Wilbur? Like that.
Right.
It was on the SAT. Like, come on.
Exactly. Okay. So our final moment of the podcast, I would like to ask you, Aaron, how do you think this film is best watched?
Okay. I have thought a lot about this, and this is what I've written down. The best environment to see this movie in is a London cinema in the Hugo Cabret era. And what I mean by that is, for those that have seen the Hugo Cabret movie, I'm assuming it is set in like Victorian, turn of the century, kind of steampunk era, like late 1890s, early 1900s in London. So think of that world. So London cinema in the Hugo Cabret era, you're eating hard candy that's been sitting out for a little too long because you bought it weeks prior and needed to get rid of it. So you thought, hey, like it's a movie about candy and chocolate, I might as well eat this candy here. And you're watching this film with your dog in the theater with you because it seems like a companion type movie. And the theater itself is old, dark, with touches of gold trim.
God, that was beautiful. Exquisitely descriptive.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very well done. I would agree. I think that's an incredible environment to watch this in, to make it really sink in, to make
Yes.
it really feel right.
Because that's how the movie made me feel, and it made me want to jump into that environment, the kind of steampunk London, trains and glass ceilings, and I don't know. And I did eat candy at the movie theater because
Good.
why else are you gonna go to a Wonka movie and not eat candy? Like it's criminal. You must. So yeah.
I love that. Well, okay, mine's a little less cool than that.
I went a
So I
little
feel
too
like
deep, but I want to
embarrassed.
hear yours. I'm very curious about yours.
All right. So I thought, I think this is an excellent movie night with friends choice because I think this is something everybody can agree on that they're like, yeah, that sounds fun enough. I'll watch it. And it's the kind of film like you should have a chocolate potluck where everyone brings something
that's
for
a
the
great
chocolate
idea.
fountain. Yeah. Or like any kind of like just you have a whole mess of like junk food,
I'm there.
chocolate
I am
in general. And everyone watches the movie together. And I think it's okay if people talk over it a little bit or get distracted sometimes because I don't think you would really lose track of the narrative. I think this film is comfortable enough that like if you're not paying attention for 10 minutes, it's okay. You'll come back and you'll be right with everybody else. You haven't missed anything. And also you can sink right back into the comfortability of this film.
Right.
And yeah, and
I love
as we all
that.
know, chocolate is best shared with friends.
Oh,
So
how sweet.
literally.
Literally. No
Yeah.
pun intended.
Pun always intended.
Yes.
Amazing. Well, okay. I want to say thank you so much, Aaron, for being on this episode.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And really glad that we got to just gush for an hour and a half about how fun Wonka was.
Right? Yes. This was wonderful. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I will see you next time for lava cakes and a movie night.
Yes.
And eventually we will probably record another episode if you're down.
Oh, I'm down. So down.
Well, it sounds like that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Movie Theater Butter, a Till Kim Productions podcast, edited by Kevin Matthew Keeling of Take the World. If you have a free moment, we'd really appreciate if you like or follow the podcast from wherever you're listening. It'll really help us grow our audience and be able to continue making episodes for you guys. You can also follow us on Instagram for monthly episode schedules, extra content, and even surprise video episodes. All right, I'm done. See you next episode.